So, Saturday, and I have got to get to work on finishing this landing where my stairs are going to land for my deck. And as you can see, this concrete pad was poured really, really poorly because look how out of square it is. It's like over an inch out of square this way, pretty much on all sides. So what I'm going to do is use my little diamond wheel on my angle grinder and just kind of cut the brick back so that I can offset my plate from my walls. And then I'm going to put, because this whole patio is sloping towards my thing, I should have probably poured a curb on top of this wall, but I'm just too lazy. So I'm just going to put some big flashings that come up 4 inches and build like a little trough. And then I'm going to caulk those down, that any water that comes up against here will just seep down into the gravel underneath the patio, or it'll just divert around. The thing about caulking down a flashing to this is that the water's going to run this way because it's sloping in. I could have probably built this up a fair bit so that the water would drain back around, but too late. So I'm going to just cut these bricks all the way through so that there's like a 1-inch gap for the water to drain down, and my drain tile pipe is right there. It's like a couple inches below this slab. So any water that comes in here will just soak down underneath the slab into the drain tile and hopefully not puddle right here, but we'll find out. Alright, so judging from that time lapse, you're probably wondering, why did I do it that way? It seemed awfully slow screwing in one step at a time. Why don't you just build 2 walls and stand them up? Well, the slab is all being out of square like it is. It's also not really that close to level in any direction. So if I was to put up just 2 of the walls the same length, and screw them down to my bottom plate there, they would just take the shape of the slab and be out of level. And I want to have the top plates being dead level so that this landing doesn't have any weirdness going on in it, right? So I just ran all my studs up a few inches long, and then I used my 6-foot level and transferred level marks all the way around and then cut them. So that way I know my top plates are perfect, right? A little bit more work, but ensures a nice finished product regardless of the pathetic, utterly disappointing concrete work. I'll get better at concrete one of these days. So the next step is for me to put my joists on here. So I'm going to be having a double rim joist all the way around. That gives me plenty of meat to screw my fascia to, as well as lag my stair stringers into. So I'm having 2 stair stringers, box timber stairs coming down here, and 2 coming down right here and notching onto this deck, or notching onto the stringers, and I'm going to be lagging through on the inside, so I want a lot of meat on the edge here. And then because this is level, and I'm going to be tiling the top of my deck, I want that to be sloping away from the house, so obviously any water that hits this is going to drain away off the front edge right here. So I've got to rip all my joists down 3/4 of an inch. I think that's plenty of slope for a little 4.5 foot landing here. And then I can ply with this sucker. Just got to plumb it up. It's actually pretty plumb right now. Get some sheeting on it. Bing, bang, boom. Got to land it. Now we gotta cut the tapers on these joists. I do this freehand on the table saw. I know that saying freehand and table saw in the same sentence just gives people a funny feeling in their coffee. And if you are at all intimidated and the idea of not using a fence or a guide and freehanding on the table saw just, gives you the willies, then do not attempt this, okay? For those of you who, are confident in their hand-eye coordination, their ability to cut a piece of wood with a very powerful machine and not be worried about losing a finger, then this is really not that difficult, okay? So I'm gonna just show you how I do it. Got my lines inked on there. Got the blade up just there above the top of the wood. And the key is basically just to use your body as a fence. And that way you don't have to wiggle around with taper guides trying to match this. I don't know how to do any of that crap, so I'm just gonna freehand. So the key is to use your hand here as kind of a pivot point. You can't make large adjustments. You kind of gotta stand back, run your eye down that line, get it close, and just commit cutting. So as you can see, it's really not that difficult. Especially once the blade is fully immersed in the board, it kind of acts as a fence. If you try to adjust it, the blade won't let you go more than like a 32nd of an inch, as you push every inch through. So you can't, I guess if you really reefed on it, you would cause a kickback, but what kind of dumbass is going to do that? So I just use my hand kind of as a bit of a guide, and once the blade's in there all the way, you can just kind of follow your piece right through. And it's really not scary or anything like that. This board's even got a pretty good twist in it, and you can see it's not. Even with a substantial twist where, that wood could have got, the blade was trying to pull that down. It didn't bind the blade or anything like that. So this is obviously softwood though. Trying to do this with maple or hardwoods that might have a lot of internal tension in them, now that's a different game. So remember that if you're cutting softwoods, it's way easier than cutting a hardwood, which, everybody knows when you're trying to push hardwood through the thing, it can split off or pinch the blade and do a lot of little more scary, risky stuff. So I don't recommend freehand ripping hardwoods unless you know the wood is really stable. All right, so we got her all sheeted up, nice and plumb, rigid, nailed off my flashing down here, so that's nice and snug to the building. I'm now gonna wrap this in Tyvek, staple that off, tape all the joints, trim it off flush up here, and then I'm gonna sheet the top of this because there's gonna be a little bit of plywood overhang. And then once this is sheeted, I can jump up here, measure, double check my stair, rise and run, cut that front of the landing there, finish sheeting that off up there, and then we're ready for tile. Now that the Tyvek is on, I've got these little blocks here that I'm going to be spacing out for my fascia. These are 7/8 of an inch thick because that's how thick the siding boards are going to be. So I want my fascia to be stepped out 7/8 of an inch so I can leave a little space, run my siding boards up, butt them underneath these blocks, and then the fascia, well actually I'm going to put the fascia on first, but then that'll leave me a gap big enough that I can slide my siding boards up underneath there so we get a nice little overlap of the fascia. Then I'm just going to put my fascia on here. I've snapped a line where it's going to go, so that'll just help me eyeball where the blocks go. Nail those on, put the fascia on, then I'm going to sheet this. All right, guys, so that is as far as I made it this last weekend. We'll be working on this again next weekend because during the week I'm still working on projects in the shop, live edge tables, all sorts of other stuff. So I realized one thing while I was framing this deck is that I really don't, well, I want the stairs to come down here, obviously, but I really don't want to block this little area that walks through into the underside of my deck here. So after kind of looking at it, I realized I do have enough room to clear that little bump out on my house and put the stairs down the backside because it's kind of a dead space on the patio behind this little landing here. So I'm gonna, instead of putting the stairs down here and cutting off this area, I'm gonna drop them down the backside, and I think that'll look really good, and hopefully I'll be able to cant them a little bit so that they shoot out kind of near the other stairs that come down there onto the patio. So the structure of the stairs is still going to be the same. I'm just orienting the staircases a little bit differently. And you can also see that this landing here is kind of teeter-tottering on this beam here, which is kind of a structural no-no. But because I'm using really heavy-duty timber, box timber stairs, I think they're 4x14 beams, those are going to be notched onto this and then lagged with 10-inch lags from the inside as well as up top. So once I lag that staircase on there, that's going to support that landing so that it doesn't rock back and forth when you step on it. So it's a little bit of tricky engineering there, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to be really stable once I get the beams bolted into that and locking it down onto this landing. The next step, once we get all the framing finished, is I got to knock out that window up there, reframe that wall, also framing in a door, and then I got to get that insulation back in before the weather starts to turn here because we're kind of coming to the end of summer. So I got to get all that buttoned up, new windows in before we can kind of move on to the next step of the project, which would be tiling the deck. So stay tuned for that, you guys. I hope you enjoy this video. If you did, please give it a like, share it with your friends. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe, because I'm not just a beautiful face to look at. I can actually teach you a few things. Especially, I can teach you what not to do most of the time. So feel free to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video. Samurai out.